Giannis went to New York to get that wrist checked out, and the news coming back is probably better than expected. It looks like Giannis isn't going to be out for a long-term period, and certainly there hasn't been the word that no one wanted to hear surgery. So a pretty good day on that front. The Bucks also made a roster move. Meyers Leonard joining the Bucks. We're going to discuss all this.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my other stuff over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's episode that's brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As always, we start the show by thanking everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every single day. We keep saying it, but we're loving the growth, whether it's the audio platform or the YouTube stuff. And the YouTube stuff in the comment section is where people are going crazy. And I suspect it's only going to get a little more busy, and the takes will be flying on the road to the postseason. And certainly there was a mix of concern and a mix of optimism from Bucks fans after our show yesterday when the news came through that Giannis was going to New York. So we appreciate everyone that gets involved in the show and engaged. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. You can do it for free, and it really helps us. So we appreciate it. But not often this happens, Frank. We've podcasted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times together, and there's usually the way it goes is you finish the podcast and then you drop some news. But we got the news late in the podcast that Giannis was going to New York to see a specialist or get a second opinion or further advice on this right wrist. For obvious reasons, there was concerns. Shams came through and said that essentially it's sore. When it's no longer sore, he's going to play. Woj came through and said that there is some ligament sprains there, but once the swelling goes down, it looks like he'll be good to go. So I say this with some caution, but it feels like this is great news. What you didn't want to hear was hearing that there was going to be surgery, that it was going to be 2 months on the sidelines, and you were potentially facing a race against time for the postseason.
Yeah, I think in the grand scheme of potential outcomes, obviously everyone would have loved to hear, on Friday that it was just
Yes.
like he'll take a few days off and hopefully be back by the time the league restarts after the All-Star break. That would have been obviously our dream scenario, but we'll see what this actually ends up being. Is it, 1 week? The timing obviously is good of the All-Star break because we get a week off without having to miss any games. But then is it another week beyond that? Is it a couple weeks? We don't really know. I think there was some, again, sort of like typical injury report stuff that came out from, some of the Twitter doctors, like actual Twitter doctors, not random people on Twitter looking up a WebMD. But I think there was some indication, like a grade 1 sprain would be, I think, like a couple weeks. Grade 2 could be 4 to 5 weeks, I think, if I remember correctly. So again, something in that time frame. Obviously, we are used to being spoiled by Giannis, just seeming to have this Wolverine type recovery ability. So on the one hand, you always feel like Giannis is going to come back sooner rather than later relative to other mere mortals. But I would also expect the Bucks you're not going to risk anything trying to bring him back too early. And again, I say that what is his, likelihood of re-injury if he comes back, after 2 weeks versus 3 weeks? No idea, right? I don't think any of us can really claim to know much about that. We haven't really heard a lot of specifics on the nature of the actual injury, but it appears that he avoided an outright tear of whatever wrist ligament this could have been. As you said, 8 weeks is the amount of time we have until the playoffs, so not a ton of time, and it would have been obviously very concerning if you had heard that he's needing to go under the knife and was going to be out for, again, for the sake of argument, call it 6 to 8 weeks or something. Because not only is it the question of, race against the clock to be ready for the playoffs. I think he would have been ready for the playoffs in that type of scenario. But what do the Bucks look like in that time period? And looking at this team, I don't want the Bucks to fall to 4th
Yeah.
Like, I would like to ideally. I mean, again, let's get greedy for a minute, right? Obviously, ideal scenario, you could somehow take the first seed. I think with Giannis, if he's out even just a week or two, I think the odds of doing that go down significantly, given the fact that you've been chasing the Celtics all year, and even if you're even in the win columns, I think it's just going to be hard. I think the Celtics are a little better set up as a regular season team, and we still have this kind of Chris Middleton thing hanging out there, with obviously him missing the last game for the All-Star break as well. So yeah, I think missing 6 to 8 weeks, you worry about seeding, and I know people can say like, well, all that really matters is these guys are healthy come the playoffs. We know that's of like the most importance, but the flip side is, as we saw last year, if you don't kind of mind the seeding question, then all of a sudden you're in the second round and don't have home court, and you're playing a really good team, and your degree of difficulty is just necessarily higher. So, yes, minimizing Giannis's absence is always the best thing. It's the best thing, obviously, for our mental health as fans who like to see our best players healthy and not injured. It's best for this team as they battle for seeding in a very competitive Eastern Conference. And, again, not that Giannis's MVP case is of the utmost importance here. I don't think he, was the front runner by any stretch, although he had clearly made a bit of a charge here over the past month or so to, give voters something to think about with Nikola Jokic sort of running away with the sort of the statistical and advanced metrics kind of race for MVP. But between him and Embiid and Giannis, I think much like last year, it was shaping up to be a really interesting kind of sprint to the finish line over the next couple months. Obviously, any time missed reduces the likelihood of Giannis or anybody else potentially winning that award. But to me, that's probably the least important piece of all this. The most important thing to me is obviously just getting all these guys healthy and ready for the playoffs. And then the second order question is being healthy enough that you can make a run at as high a seed as possible. So yeah, grand scheme of, best case, worst case outcomes, I think we'll take it. But it's also still a little bit weird because, as you said, I mean, not a lot of clarity as far as the actual timeline here. Is it a week beyond this week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? None of us really know. And kind of the guidance that we did see was obviously non-committal and suggesting, well, it'll be based on the swelling and how quickly recovers, sort of just monitoring it and figuring out how the healing process is like. So, of course, we will expect Giannis will be on the faster end of the healing timeline, but we also know the Bucks will probably not take any chances with him either.
I've got a couple more questions on Giannis for you, but you mentioned the MVP. So while you did that, we may as well strike while the iron's hot and talk about our friends over at FanDuel, which, as we know by now, it is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win, which still rattles me. If your first bet doesn't win, you can win up to $1,000 in bonus bets. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. And you can also bet on the NBA MVP. And Giannis has just drifted out a little bit. I think that's probably to be expected. I thought we were virtually looking at a two-horse race with Nikola Jokic and Giannis, but Giannis is now the third favorite according to FanDuel. So maybe you see some value there if you think he's only going to miss a couple of games. Jokic at -240, Joel Embiid at +600, then Giannis at +700. So you can check that out at the FanDuel website or also on the FanDuel app. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can learn more there. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So clearly, we would prefer to be a little bit more optimistic about this. And I was definitely happy when I saw those results. Do not get me wrong. But we have seen in the past, Chris Middleton last year played through with wrist injuries. So what does it mean long-term or after the season? Who knows? Maybe they've determined that there is nothing to be done now, that maybe it's a postseason thing that happens. you also just hope, as you pointed to, that there's no further aggravation here. But you mentioned Chris Middleton missing the last game. I had a few people, whether it was on YouTube or just on Twitter, sort of reaching out and saying that they were kind of annoyed that he even played that last game. It's an interesting conversation, and it's always one of those things that you're going to sit back and say, well, if he doesn't play and the Bucks lose the game, fans are mad because the winning streak is no longer a thing. You've got one more game leading into the All-Star break. Do you care about that at all? Did you go into that game thinking, gee, I wish Giannis wasn't playing, rest some guys into the break?
Sometimes I feel like I've seen this sentiment a bit on Twitter where, if it comes out that the opponent's best player or something like that is not playing, then it immediately becomes this like race to like, oh, the Bucks shouldn't play any of their dudes and, get a rest or whatever. And I don't know. I mean, look, obviously the big prize here is an NBA championship, and you have to be mindful of, managing guys throughout the season and all that. That said, like the idea, I'm trying to remember which game it was, but I think there was one, and this is where it was a home game, and some team, I forget, I'm trying to remember which team it was. It was not that long ago, but basically they were resting kind of key guys in Milwaukee. And I saw just a couple of references like, oh, well, might as well just sit Giannis and whatever. And part of me is like, I mean, the goal of the regular season is not to like, rest Giannis whenever you can and try to scratch out a win. I mean, especially like thinking about it just from a practical perspective, we talk about load management and like the product and what it means for fans. I mean, if the other team is gonna rest dudes and Giannis is like healthy and able to play, like why would you rest him at home? If it's not a back-to-back or something like that, like don't screw over your own fans just because the other team is resting guys. To me, it's like, it's like the Boston thing, right? Where I think that was one example where it's like, oh, they're resting, they're ducking Giannis, whatever, maybe rest Giannis. And it's like, well, I mean, first off, I think we saw like the Bucks needed to play Giannis because you can't just take any of these games for granted. That Celtics game being an example. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's obviously a logic to the way the Bucks try to manage his body, and the same goes for Chris Middleton in particular. They've been fortunate, Drew Holiday and Brook Lopez. I'm just gonna give them the benefit of the doubt that the reason those guys have not been rested nearly as much is because they've just been feeling really good and they haven't felt like they had to do that. But that said, if you can give like Brook Lopez a few more, reduce his minutes a little bit the rest of the way, given he's been playing 30 minutes, the most that he's played since coming to the Bucks in terms of per game basis, I would be totally fine with, cutting back on his minutes a little bit. But, again, in the grand scheme of things, like if Giannis is healthy and given where the Bucks are, and it's not like a back-to-back situation, I mean, play him, like I don't know. I mean, I think if it's like the last weekend of the season and there's nothing to play for, sure, rest them, right? Don't risk anything for the playoffs. But we're still 2 months before, the playoffs start, and going into the All-Star break. Obviously, the team had been playing really well. Yes, DeMar DeRozan wasn't playing, but you've lost to the Bulls twice already this year. Can't really take anything for granted. So, yeah, I mean, if Giannis is feeling good and it was a regular rest scenario as well, they'd had a day off, I'm totally fine with them playing healthy players, including your superstar, because I do think the regular season should still matter, and I think seeding does matter to some extent. So I had no real beef with it. Again, if he'd been like carrying a wrist injury into that game and then he hurts the wrist injury, or hurts a wrist, then I can see the argument for, well, why were you risking anything? But again, if a guy's pretty much healthy, then just play him. And again, I think part of it's also just comes down to me feeling like, you're end of the day, you're a product, and whether obviously the fans who pay a lot of money for tickets are the main people that we think about when we talk about that, but also just people tuning in at home, right? Do you think it's fun being a fan watching the Clippers on TV all year, right? With how much kind of load management that they do? Like, no, I don't think people have fun with that either. So yeah, I didn't really have any problem with it. Obviously just an unfortunate thing, but I mean, again, it's basketball, stuff happens, and we're used to Giannis being able to play through stuff. Normally he'll like sprain, turn his ankle, and then he'll just keep playing, and then he might miss like the next game when he gets hurt in game. It's pretty rare for him to be knocked out of a game as early as he was. sadly knocking down his per game scoring about 0.7 points per game. Kane was very, very frustrating for me, obviously. But long story short, I don't really have a problem with it. And obviously now the big question is just, now that he actually is legitimately injured, what does that look like in terms of his coming back and the risk of coming back early versus late? That said, the big silver lining of all this is, we always talk about trying to get Giannis rest for his knee and / knees, and manage that. Just given that he's has always had kind of over the last 5 years or so occasional issues with soreness. I mean, it's not the reason we wanted him to have a couple weeks to rest his knees, but if he gets a couple weeks off to recharge those knees, I mean, the last time he did that, he came back and started doing what he's been doing over the past month, right? Like that really hot stretch of play came after some struggles. He gets a couple weeks off to rest up and then comes out shot like a cannon. So that might be, a silver lining to all this, is just him getting a little chance to recuperate and kind of heal his body a little bit, even beyond the wrist.
Now that is the type of silver lining we're looking for on this podcast tonight. Get Giannis some rest, because let's just theorize. Let's say he misses 6 or 7 games, and this is all whatever, hypothetical. But if he misses 6 or 7 games, that is the fewest amount of games he would have played in any season. Certainly a full season. I know there was some stuff there with the shortened season, but if he does go in with a little bit of fresher legs, maybe you take that as a bonus. It does hurt the MVP stuff, and I know there'll be some frustration there from fans. But overall, fingers crossed he is back very soon. Now, just quickly on the stats. You're the Giannis stats man. We know that. The problem with the All-Star game, only 2 points. I believe he was the all-time leading points per game scorer in the All-Star game. Now, I will say, I don't think that's a record that's going to stand with the way that players are scoring in the All-Star game. So maybe it doesn't actually matter at all, but certainly hurt the per game averages as far as the All-Star game goes for Giannis. But he got his 2 points, not a dunk, I would say, just a little drop in.
So I'm counting that as a dunk. It was more just he didn't really grab the rim. Got to be mindful of that risk, but yes. I'll count it as a dunk, Kane. I'm in my dunk tracker. I'm counting that as a dunk.
All right, I like it. All right, let's get to the roster stuff and Meyers Leonard. And I've got another tweet I want to show to you and get a response from you. I haven't shown you it yet. Let's get to the roster stuff next. So we've been talking about all this Giannis stuff and the injury, and we were already talking about the idea of the Bucks potentially adding another big man, because Bobby Portis has been out for a little period of time now. When is he going to come back? Now, Meyers Leonard was not on my radar, and in all honesty, he had been mentioned a couple of times that the Bucks had some interest, some loose interest, but it certainly was not at the forefront of my mind for a couple of reasons. First, he hasn't played basketball for 2 years, and then of course the reason that originally why he was out, because he was playing a video game and had the slur, the anti-Semitic slur that, let's face it, was not good stuff. And he hasn't been back since. He's had some nerve damage and some injuries since. So this was more than anything a very surprising signing to me, that's the guy you go for that hasn't been back for 2 years. Last time you were seen or heard from, it was not good stuff in the news. And now you're bringing him back. Now, it's only a 10-day contract, but I have to say my reaction to this, I was pretty surprised this was the path that they wanted to go down.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about, potential buyout candidates, but obviously we've been focusing on players that were in the league, players that were getting bought out, and guys of that ilk, and number of guys that we would have had on our potential lists, have either been signed or seemed like maybe they aren't going to get waived at all, right? Like Dario Saric is a guy, I think we were talking about in the chat, but he's now playing for the Thunder. Maybe he's just not going to get bought out, right? Basically, for those curious, players need to be bought out by the end of February in order to be eligible to sign with another team thereafter and be eligible to play in the playoffs. So if you get waived by another team on March 2nd and then sign with the Bucks, then you wouldn't be playoff eligible. So you'll see everybody that matters, that actually has an opportunity to be an impact, quote unquote impact buyout guy, will be waived before the end of this month. But again, that some of that stuff may kind of linger for a little bit. So as you said, would Meyers Leonard have been on my list of guys to sign? No, for the reasons you mentioned, right? Last time we saw him, it was like, well, screw that guy, like when the news comes out about the slur on the live stream, and it's just like, well, I don't want to. I mean, as a fan of a team, like, why would you want your team to add that guy, right? Because we can say that, from the perspective, like, we want to root for people that we like and do things that we like. Well, why would you want that guy on your team, especially given B, he's not very good. so it's like, there's the Kyrie Irving corollary, which is that people will look past a whole lot of stuff if you're really good at basketball. And again, I will never judge fans for, deciding what you do and don't like about players, or what kind of players you'll potentially look past off-court stuff for versus what kind of players you won't. But I think we'd be naive to say that how good you are at basketball does not figure into that whole calculus for people. So, I think for people that are just like, well, screw this guy, given what he said, like, I don't want this guy on my team. Hey, fair enough, right? As fans, like, you can absolutely choose who you want to be on your team, right? We've had this discussion around, Derrick Rose. We didn't realize this was going to be a situation with Bryn Forbes, who we were talking about as a potential buyout candidate, and then a couple days later gets arrested for, assaulting his girlfriend, which is like, I mean, for the record, I'll say that to me is way worse than, Meyers Leonard seemingly, like, I mean, again, he claimed he didn't really know the origin of what he was saying. Again, I'm not interested in giving Meyers Leonard a lie detector test, but he seems like, kind of like a frat bro kind of guy who probably does not know the etymology of ethnic slurs and things like that. So who knows? But I'm going to assume, especially based on what he's done in terms of actually putting in time with Jewish groups, Jewish leaders, he's obviously tried to, I'd say, right the wrong that he committed with what he said. And again, whether you as a fan, quote unquote, forgive him, your mileage may vary, right? But to me, I don't know. I didn't really have a strong reaction to this, just because I think it seems like he has made attempts to actually, get forgiveness from the community that would have been particularly offended by this. And honestly, it's been 2 years. He's obviously, I mean, he hasn't been employed since then. And probably most importantly, though, out of all this, I mean, it's a 10-day contract. Like, does he play 10 minutes in the next 10 days and then actually just get released before he ever really even is functionally even really much of a part of this basketball team? I think there's a very real chance that happens. I think of bad buyout guys, we always just sort of assume they're getting signed to rest of year contracts, but that's not what he's even been signed to. It's obviously very much a, prove it type of situation. So he's going to have to come in and, prove that he deserves another 10-day before then the Bucks might have to actually sign him to a rest of year contract. And the other piece to this as well, in terms of, well, why are the Bucks doing this? Obviously Giannis being out potentially for some period, Bobby Portis seems to be very close to returning, but is he going to be back for next Friday when the Bucks play their first games of the All-Star break? Not clear yet, right? We don't have, I think, a clear sense of that. So yes, the Bucks do have some roster thinness. There aren't a ton of good options on the buyout market as of yet. We may see guys like Nerlens Noel, who I would take a longer look at than someone like Meyers Leonard, just given that he's been actually like a very good NBA player, or good NBA defensive player. I should qualify that. Who's actually played real minutes in the last couple of years for a team. Maybe not this year on Detroit, but he actually was a pretty regular rotation guy for the Knicks and was actually had a role there. So we'll see. If that type of player becomes available before the end of February, you can obviously just say, all right, thanks, Meyers, peace out, and sign a Noel type or someone else that might become available. So yeah, it's a 10-day. Is he actually even going to play? I have no idea. I think there have been some examples. Obviously, Boogie Cousins played a lot coming in a year ago. Bit of different circumstances though, given that he was a pure center. Brook Lopez, the only real pure center on the Bucks roster, was out for an extended period at that point. Knock on wood, God willing, Brook Lopez is going to be healthy the rest of the year, and had a nice little break here. Hopefully he didn't jam his back up going on any Disney rides over the All-Star break. So especially if Bobby Portis is back, you really don't need to play Meyers Leonard at all. And even if Bobby Portis is not back, will we see Jay Crowder hopefully this coming weekend? That was kind of the goal. And so the timing actually works out pretty well in terms of, again, not a center, but at least someone that will be able to kind of help patch over Giannis's presumed absence at the power forward spot. So, I guess we'll probably see a little bit of Meyers Leonard at some point over the next, call it 10 days from when the season restarts. But, I think the other piece too is the Bucks are at 13 roster spots. In theory, you're not supposed to be below 14 for any extended period. So again, not that there's like some ironclad, thing that you're going to lose draft picks or something if you don't sign a guy this week. But I think there was obviously the league required the Bucks to get up to 14 guys on the roster. And, to me, part of this is probably just them saying, all right, I guess we'll add this 10-day contract so that we're not really committing to who we want that 14th guy to be. But we'll again, kind of comply with the league requirement and then kind of sort things out depending on what happens thereafter. So I'm not going to call it like a nothing burger, but he's obviously a guy. I mean, we haven't really talked about what kind of player he is. I mean, he basically became like a 3-point shooter during his time in Portland and brief time with the Heat. Obviously, he's a big body, but has not been a guy. When you look at the numbers, I would say he's not been a guy who has proven to impact winning in a particularly positive way. But yes, he's a big body. He shoots threes, career 39% 3-point shooter. So he profiles, at least in that regard, as a guy that matches what the Bucks would be interested in. And apparently the Bucks have been sort of keeping tabs on him for a while now. So it's not completely out of the blue either.
Yeah, that's right. And you'd like to think that they've obviously done their due diligence on what he has been doing over the last year or so, at least anyway. But I'm the same as you. I'm going to, people react however they want to. I'll listen to the people, especially that were impacted by this in terms of the community of where the slur was directed to. So it's not someone that I wasn't thrilled about it. I thought this is not exactly the path I would go for off-court and on-court reasons. So not an exciting signing. If he's gone in 10 days, I'd feel pretty fine about that. So we'll see what happens with Meyers Leonard. All right, check out the Locked On Game to Game podcast, wherever you get your podcasts on your Locked On NBA feed. Get recaps from all the action across the NBA, obviously, when it gets going again. So check out the Locked On Game to Game podcast on your Locked On NBA feed. You'll hear my voice a little bit on that show, as if you don't hear it enough. Now, we thank you again for subscribing. Drop your comments, whether it's on Twitter, on the YouTube feed from today's show. Plenty of relief. Get your Giannis relief out in the YouTube comments. We appreciate it. It helps us subscribe, turn notifications on. A couple more days until the Bucks are back on the court. So stick with us. We'll have some shows right throughout the week leading into the Miami game on Friday night. Geez, they had to give us a game on the weekend as well. Who knows? We might be podcasting. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.